Today, I'm going to show you how to authenticate your Next.js applications using Appwrite. Appwrite is an open source platform that lets you add authentication, database, functions, storage, and a bunch of other features that allow you to build any application at scale with your own data and use your preferred coding language. And this is a very similar platform to something like Firebase, in which I have a tutorial previously that I've created on Firebase. But I just want to give you some other options out there for authentication. We've done Next.auth, we've done Firebase, but now let me show you how it kind of works with using Appwrite, as I think that by kind of using these different tools and platforms and implementing authentication in all of them, you really get a good idea of kind of how to implement authentication across the board. And you can see with Appwrite's kind of homepage here, they have some really kind of nice docs here. And I've also had Dennis Ivey on my podcast, and he works at Appwrite and kind of talked about it. And I definitely wanted to kind of look into it and explore after that. And it looks really cool. You know, I definitely like it so far. I think that their docs are really solid here. So let's go ahead here and start with just authenticating a Next.js application. And then in future videos, we might do some other cool stuff with Appwrite, like implementing a database and stuff like that. So from appwrite.io/docs here, I'm going to click on this big go to console button. And if you want to navigate to this directly, you can go cloud.appwrite.io/console. Now, it already has me logged in since I already have an Appwrite account, but you can create an account here quick and you should see this very same homepage. But now that we're here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click create project. And I'm going to go empty project, and then I'm just going to call this Appwrite auth. And I'm going to click create. And now that I've created this, and I'm going to just delete this project once I create this tutorial. So I'm going to show you all of my project IDs and stuff like that. But generally speaking, you want to make sure that you keep those hidden, and we will use a .env file for this, so you don't push it up to GitHub and stuff like that. And I'll have the project linked in the description below if you want to see the final project after this. But what we're going to do here is I'm going to click on web. And for the name, you can give it any name, but I'm going to give mine Appwrite auth. And then for your host name, it's just going to be localhost. Now, if you go and deploy this project, you might change it to something like vercel.app or netlify.app or something like this. But I would just say, maybe read a little bit more about this host name. For now, in local development, you're going to want to set this to localhost. But once you deploy it, you are going to want to change your host name or add a domain. But I'm going to click next. And then it gives me some stuff to do here, but I'm just going to click skip optional steps. So now we should see our dashboard here. And our goal here is when we click on auth, we eventually want to be able to refresh this page and see some users, because that would be like authenticated users for our app, which is the goal of this tutorial. So what we're going to go ahead and do now is head over to VS Code, and I'm going to be using the theme Winter is Coming. I use this basically for all of my tutorials, and just mentioning that off the top because I know someone will ask. But the first thing that we're going to do is npx create-next-app at latest. And then I'm just going to call this Appwrite auth. No TypeScript, no ESLint. I will use Tailwind. I am going to be adding just some styles here at the end, so this doesn't look completely terrible. You don't necessarily need to add styles. The purpose of this video is definitely going to be focused on just the functionality of adding authentication to your Next.js app using Appwrite. But I am going to style it with Tailwind just a little bit at the end, and I'm going to show you how easy that is to do using ChatGPT, not using src directory, and I would like to use the app router, and I'm not going to customize the default import alias. And now it's gone ahead and created this project, so I'm going to go ahead and go File, Open, and then open this project within VS Code. So now that I have this project opened here, the first thing that we need to do is run npm install Appwrite, and this will install the Appwrite package. And then from there, we need to connect our application to Appwrite. But before we do this, let me just run npm run dev, to start this up on localhost 3000. So it has started, and I'll open localhost here. I'll refresh my page. I'm also going to close my console here, and we see just the default homepage here for our application. Now that I have this, we need to connect our application to Appwrite. So the way that we can do this is within my app folder here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this appwrite.js. So appwrite.js. And then here, this is going to be very similar to what we did with Firebase and what you do with pretty much all authentication providers. You basically set up different credentials that you're going to be using for your project. So in our case here, what we need to do is we need to import client and account from Appwrite. And then once we do that, we can then export const client is equal to new client. And then we're going to set our different credentials for our client here. So we're going to go client dot set endpoint. And then this endpoint is going to be, if we go back to our console here, I'm going to go in the bottom left. You should see a settings. I have mine off the screen just a little bit, but you see that settings toggle that I just clicked. I'm going to click on that. And then you see here, it says API endpoint. I'm going to click copy. And then we're going to head back to VS Code, and I'm going to set my endpoint here to that API endpoint. And then once I do that, I'm going to .set project. So you're just chaining these on to one another. Client.set endpoint.set project. And this is where you're going to grab your project ID, which is also in these settings here. I'm going to click copy, and I'm going to paste my project ID. Now, if you're doing this and maybe you want to add authentication, you want to go do some other stuff with this, and you want to actually use this in a project, you don't want to push this secret up to GitHub. So instead of doing that, let's create a new file here in the root directory. So I'm going to go .env.local, and you don't want this in your app directory. You want to make sure it is in the root directory. So this env.local should be on the same level as like your Next.js config, package.json, so on and so forth. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say next underscore public underscore project underscore ID. And then I'm going to go back to my Appwrite file. I'm going to copy this project ID, and then I'm going to paste my project ID in there. And then I guess we also will do next public, and I'll do maybe Appwrite endpoint. And I will go back to my appwrite.js. I will copy my endpoint here, go back to env.local, and paste that in here. So I'm setting next public project ID as well as Appwrite endpoint for my project ID and my endpoint. And then in my Appwrite file, what I'm going to go ahead and do is I'm going to set this, instead of just this hard-coded string, I'm going to do process.env. And then I already forget what I named it. Let's go back, and this is going to be my Appwrite endpoint. Paste that there, and I'm going to actually put these on separate lines here so you can see it. So I'm going to set endpoint and then set project, and then this is going to be process.env, and I'm going to paste this in here, and instead of Appwrite endpoint, it's going to be next public project ID. All right, so we have set our endpoint and set our project ID. And then once we have those in place, we can then go ahead and say export const account is equal to new account and pass in our client. So this is basically connecting our Next.js app to our Appwrite SDK here. And then we can also export ID from Appwrite. because we are going to use this ID to create a unique ID for our users. So now that we have this in place, let's go over to our page.js file. But if you've watched my tutorials before, I do like to just call this a JSX file. For one, I like the icon better over here. And then for two, it also gives better code completion because it knows I'm writing JSX. At the top of the file, I'm going to use client because in this page, this is where we're going to add our functionality to log in, register, and log out. We're going to add all that within this page here. So I'm actually going to get rid of maybe everything here. Maybe I'll keep the main tag. So I'm going to get rid of everything but my main tag. I'm going to go ahead and do this. We're going to assume in this return statement that the user is not logged in. So I'm going to say h1, and I'm going to call this login page. Maybe I'll call it login or sign up page and then log in. And then from there, we need to go ahead and add some different inputs. And for these, I think it makes sense to, maybe we can make this just like a big form. So I'll do form and I'm not going to put an action, just going to use a regular form. And then I'm going to do an input. And then it's going to be type email. And then I'm going to do placeholder is equal to email, so they can know that this is an email input. And I'm going to set the value is going to be also email, but this is when we need to actually use some state here. So I'm going to go import use state from React. And then I'm going to say const email, comma set email is equal to use state. So const email, comma set email is equal to useState. I'm going to initialize that to an empty string. So we're just calling the useState function in React that is going to return an array of two values. The first is going to be the value of our state, and the second is going to be a way to set that state. So we're just making this input a controlled input in which we're setting the value to our piece of React state, which is going to be the email. For the on change event, let me actually put this down into a separate line here. What we're going to do is we're going to say on change, it's going to accept an event, and then we're just going to set our email, and that is going to be our event.target.value. So we have our email input in place, but now we also need to do our password input. So if you're learning right now, it wouldn't be a bad idea to, all right, now for you, create a password input. I think that would be a good thing for you to try to do here, but I'm going to go ahead and implement that here. I'm going to copy my email input. I'm going to change my type to password. I'm going to set my placeholder is also going to be password. And then I'm going to set my value is going to be password. And I'm going to copy this email and set email. I'm going to option shift down arrow, and that's going to copy that down. And instead of email and set email, it's going to be password and set password. So password and set password. That's going to be initialized as an empty string. And then instead of set email here, I'm going to do set password. And then from here, I honestly think those are the only two inputs I need. But now I do need to add like a login button as well as a register button. So they can either log in with a pre-existing account, or they can type in an email password and register a new account. So yeah, I mean, this might not be your preferred UI, UX. It probably wouldn't be mine, but we are really just trying to focus on the functionality of adding authentication using Appwrite here. So forgive me for that, but we are just focusing on kind of the core functionality in here. And I don't want to get bogged down with too many other things. So I'm going to set this type is equal to button. And then I'm going to also do on click. What we're going to have to do is I'm going to call handle login, and then I'm going to say login. So we also need to do a function called handle login. And then for now, I'm just going to return null. I'm just initializing this function. And we're also going to do a function called handle register, except we need to use the function keyword. So handle register, and then we're going to do the same thing. For now, we're just going to return null. All right, so we have our handle login, button right here. And now let's do the handle register. So I'm going to copy the login button, and then I'm just going to say handle register. And then instead of login, I'm going to go register. So now we have those in place. So now we can actually add the logic for logging in and registering. To do this, what we can do is we can import, and I'm just going to use an empty square brackets right now. We're going to import from Appwrite. And what we're going to import is our account as well as the ID. And then for our handle login function, we're actually going to make this an async function, in which I'm going to go async function handle login, and I'm going to go try. And then we're going to do await account dot create email session. And then we just need to pass in our email as well as our password. And we're also going to catch if there's an error. Let's just console dot error the error. And that is basically all we're going to have to do to log in here. And registering is also super easy to do. We are also going to make this an async function though. So I'm going to do async function handle register, and I'm going to do try. I'm going to do await account dot create. And you can see in the documentation for Appwrite that they have examples of creating accounts, creating email sessions, so logging in and doing that stuff with their web SDK, which is what we are currently using. But we first need to pass into account.create. We need to pass in a unique ID. So we're using id.unique, which is just a helper function that Appwrite gives us. And then I'm going to pass in the email as well as a password. And once they register an account, let's also log in this user. So after this, let's also call handle login. And within our handle login, I think we also want to make sure to clear the email as well as the password if they successfully log in and we don't enter this catch block. But then we'll also do catch error, and then I'll just console.error the error. Now that I have that in place, I kind of think that is all we need to kind of log in as well as register. So let me go back to our localhost 3000 here and refresh the page. And you can see I have this just magnificently styled login or sign up page here. But, you know, I think it actually makes more sense here to give this a little bit of styles. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to copy everything within my main tags here. And then I'm going to head over to ChatGPT, and I'm going to say, and I'm using GPT-4. This should work just fine in GPT-3 though. But I'm just going to basically, and let me move this just a little bit here. I'm going to basically say, here's my React code for a login or sign up page. I'm using Tailwind to style my app. Make this login and sign up page look good using Tailwind CSS. Make sure it's in dark mode. And then I'm going to paste my code in here, and let's see what it comes up with here. And it has finished writing this code. So I'm going to go ahead and check this over quick. So just to make sure, so it still calls handle register here. It looks like, you know, that logic is still the same. So set password event.target.value, that's correct. Password, email, set email event.target.value, login or sign up page. So it looks like it kept all the same logic, which is good. It's always good to check over ChatGPT and make sure it's doing the right thing there. But I'm going to copy this. I'm going to head back here, and I'm going to just paste in all the code that it just wrote for me. So what you can see is it added all these different Tailwind class names here. So dark gray background, and added all this stuff to the inputs and everything. So let's go back to localhost, and wow, doesn't that look so much better? Now, I would say that maybe one thing I would change here is, this isn't too bad. I would maybe separate the email and password inputs a little bit though. So maybe to the password input, let's find it here. So password input, I think the only thing that I want to do is maybe add some margin left to the password input. And I totally forget. I think it's something just like, M1. And that actually looks pretty decent. Maybe M2. And yeah, that's honestly all I really wanted there. So I was going to ask ChatGPT to remind me how to add margin to both sides, but I think this looks good enough for our use case. Like this doesn't look great, I'll be honest with you, but it also doesn't look that bad. And for us just trying to integrate Appwrite with Next.js, I don't know why I just said Appwrite like that, but for us to just integrate those two, I think this will be just fine. So now that we have this, I should be able to register a new user. So I'm going to go ahead and do Ryan at coderyan.io, and I'll do a password here. And then I'm going to click register, and I get type error, password is not a function. So let me come back here. What did I do wrong here? So I used set email and I did not use set password. So it looks like it did create this account here, but just my kind of flawed logic there caused it to kind of error here at the end. But I actually think that we should still have created an account. So let's go back to Appwrite. I'm going to click on auth, and then we see I have my user within my account, which is great to see. Now, after you have a user in your application, like my user is currently logged in right now, or at least I assume that's the case. Actually, I was looking at the wrong thing. So I called register here. So it registered my user successfully, and then it called handle login, and I should also await handle login just so we catch that error. But then it failed after that. So it should have an active session here as well, because it created the user and then it logged them in. So the way that we can actually use a user is I can say const user, set user is equal to, and then I'm going to say use state, and then we're going to initialize it to null. But after we log in a user, what I can do is I can set my user here, and then I can await, and then I can call account.get. And calling account.get is going to return my current active user if I have one, which I should have one, assuming I created this email session here. And then what we can also do is, like if I just land on this page, I can use a use effect. I can import that from React, and I can just run this on mount. And when this component mounts, what I can do is I can say set my user to await account.get. This is actually not going to work though, because I'm trying to use await within a non-async function, but I can't just do this because I can't pass in, or I can't have use effect return a promise. So what I need to do is say function get user, and I'm going to make this an async function get user. And then I'm going to just do set user is await account.get. And then instead of this outside of my get user function, I'm just going to call get user right here. So when my component mounts, I'm going to set my user to my current user here. And then after I log in, I'm also going to set my user. So here, let's just console.log my user. And if I come back, what you can see is I do indeed have a user here. And if I clear this and I refresh my page, you see that I still have a user here. So that is great. I definitely want a user. But one kind of issue that we see here is that it does set my user to null first. So, well, actually before this, let me just say that if they have a user, let's just return a page that, or a card that says you're already logged in, head to our application. And that could be where you write more of our application here because you know you have an authenticated user at that point. But let's ask ChatGPT, create a card for this page that says you're already logged in. This card should also just be in dark mode. So let's have ChatGPT go ahead and do this for us here. And it creates this div with a p tag that says you're already logged in. And what I'm going to say is if we have a user, then I just want to return this div that they are already logged in. And let me space this just a little bit better here. All right, so that makes it look a little bit better here. So it basically just returns this div that they're already logged in. And let me go back to localhost 3000. And we do see this page, which is really cool to see. But if I refresh this here, we're going to see that the user is null for a split second. And we're not going to see this card. We're going to see our login page. So you see, we do see exactly that. And to fix this, what we can do is we can use some loading state. So I can say const loading user, set loading user is equal to use state. Let's initialize that to true. And then for this use effect here, I'm going to say once we set the user, then I want to set my loading user to false. So I think that should be about it, but actually we need to handle our loading user. So let's go ahead and ask ChatGPT. That's great. Do the same thing, but show a card saying loading user. So here it created that card. So I'm going to copy this, head back, and then above my if user, I'm going to say if loading user, then let's just return this card that ChatGPT, and I'm going to reformat this to make it look just a little bit better. All right, so we have that formatted, and now let's come back here. Let's see if that fixes our issue here. So let's refresh, and we see loading user, you're already logged in. That's pretty cool. And look at this animation that ChatGPT gave us out of the box here. That's pretty wild, and we're already logged in. So really, really cool there. So now we've added this functionality, but we're still missing one piece, and that is this you're already logged in card. It should also have a logout button. So let's go ahead and say for the card that says you're already logged in, add a button for the user to log out. So we can see that it uses the same card here, but it just adds this button here below for log out. And then we need to implement the handle logout function. And, I can actually just copy this button right here and then head back and then if user, and then let me see, they pasted this right below the bottom div. So I'm going to take this, paste it in here, but let me clean this up. All right. So now we have our button in place here, and let's go ahead, check localhost, and we see handle logout is not defined, which is what we would expect. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and let's do async function logout. Actually, it should be handle logout. And for this function here, we're going to await account. Actually, let's, do this the right way, try. And then we are going to await account dot delete session. And then we're going to just pass in the string current. So this will delete the current active session. And then we just need to set our user back to null. And then we will also catch an error and console.error the error. So now we should be able to see if they're loading, we see our loading card. If we have a user, we will see this you're already logged in page with the handle logout function and their ability to log out. And then if they have neither of those, we should see our login or register page. So let's come back here and we see we have this massive logout button. I actually don't love this. So let's add some margin to this. So I'm going to do M3 on this. And it adds just a little bit. Maybe I forgot the hyphen. M-3. And that doesn't look terrible. I mean, I'm not going to get too particular with it. I don't love how this is styled right now, but for the sake of this, I think it's fine. So let's go ahead and log out. And then we see our login or sign up page here again. So let's go through the whole flow here one more time. So I'm going to register a user, and then I'm going to log out with that user, and then log back in with that user, and then maybe log back out just for fun. So Ryan at ryansolomon.io. And this is kind of distracting, so I'm going to just close the console here. And then I'm going to use the same password that I use for everything in my entire life. I'm going to click register. And then I see you're already logged in. So it did register that user. Let's go to Appwrite here. Let's refresh the page. I should now see a second user, and I do. Let's come back. Let's now log out. And then let's log back in with Ryan at ryansolomon.io. Let's see if I can remember my password here. Now let's click log in, and then we see you're already logged in. So it does successfully log in. If I refresh this, we see loading user, and then we see you're logged in, and then we can log out. So we have successfully implemented log in, register, log out, using the user, loading state, all that stuff within Next.js using Appwrite. So hopefully you enjoyed this and learned a bunch from it, and I will see you in that next one.